Okay, so we had trouble before, and the sound wasn't coming through, so we lost a few people. So those of you who are still here, uh, can you type me a message if you can hear me clearly now? I shut everything down and restarted my computer. See if that would fix the sound problem. So am I coming in? Very good. All right. Well, sorry for the delay. Uh, this, like I said, this class is really kind of theoretical, and part of the reason why I kept it for the end is because the when I've presented the Tree of Life before, I've been accused of being really New Age, and people sometimes are really nervous about this. And yet I wanted to do a class just to explain the validity of this model, why I think this model is absolutely 100% accurate. And also, I think in understanding the model, you're going to understand the emotional energy centers better and the whole concept of balance and wholeness better, which is what is really going on with emotional healing. It's about restoring wholeness to people. And the Tree of Life is a model of wholeness. And so we'll begin with talking about creation. And again, coming back to my first herb teacher, Edward Milo Millett, he'd had this spiritual experience, and he told me once, if you could understand color, music, and language, you'd understand how the universe was put together. Well, I thought that was a really interesting thing. He'd had this spiritual experience about that, like God spoke the word, and the word was creative. And he had this, one of the things he'd had was this understanding that DNA was like this coding, like a musical code, like it was translating vibrations and emanating vibrations out that were actually influencing the body in sequence, like musical notes. And I many years ago saw a thing where they'd actually taken the different sequences on the genome, and they had assigned them musical notes, and they played it, and it sounded very much like Bach, who was said to have written his music to glorify God. And so if you that got me really curious, and I studied a lot in trying to understand color and music and vibrations and so forth. And what they found out is that these are all based on mathematical ratios. It's all very mathematical. And what you have on this little picture, the thing I got off the internet, is you have this picture of what we call the sacred spiral, which is basically the rotating sequence of frequencies coming back to the bass note C in going up an octave higher in vibration. And every time you go from, starting do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and then up to the next do, you have doubled the rate of vibration. So if the bass C was, vibrating at a vibration of 1, then the next C would be, or do, would be vibrating at 2, and the next one at 4, and the next one would be 8, and the next one would be 16, and so forth. So it becomes this progression. And those mathematical ratios define not only music, but they define color. They're like notes. And so the way this works in music is, if you imagine that you have like a guitar string and you pluck it, well, it vibrates along the length of the string, and that's a particular wavelength. In other words, the wave is that long. It's vibrating that length. But at the same time it's vibrating that length, it's also vibrating like this on half the length, and it's also vibrating on 1/3 of the length, and then 1/4 of the length. And that half length is the next octave up, and the quarter of the length is the next octave up after that, and then so up to the 8 to 1 is the next higher octave, and it goes up and up and up. And so the different notes are actually mathematical divisions of the string. And so a third would be 1/3 of the string, a quarter 1/4 of the string, and so forth. And these ratios are what define musical notes. It's actually a mathematical formula. And those same mathematical formulas, in the colors we see in visible light, those same ratios of frequencies are what define the colors of the rainbow, as defined like the musical scale. So there's 7 basic colors of the rainbows. There are 7 notes of the musical scale, and they all have the exact same mathematical ratios in how we perceive both color and sound. So each time you go through a series of 8 notes, which is the musical scale, or 13 notes, which is the musical scale including all the sharps and flats, you've basically rounded one turn of this spiral of energy, and you come back. So here's C, you see, and here's the next C, but the next C is vibrating at a different frequency. And then there's the other C right here, and here's the other C right there. And this actually creates a spiral that's built on the golden mean. And this particular pattern is found all throughout nature, in the way seashells grow, in the way flowers grow, in the way our human body is proportioned to this golden mean. In other words, the whole universe is full of these frequencies of color and so forth. So what Royland explained to me is basically you have here this taking that string of musical notes, or that string of colors, instead of putting it on a wheel, you're putting it on a straight line. And here they are all laid out in sequence, like the colors on the rainbow would be laid out if you laid them in a string. And what he says is there are certain harmonic connections between those different vibrations, that when you collapse all those harmonic connections so that each one of them is exactly the same length, you basically create this structure over here. So it's basically a pattern of one turn of what's called the sacred spiral, or one octave of frequencies that we're looking at when we talk about the whole notion of the tree of life. So this is showing the musical scale, the piano keyboard, and showing, again, I'm not a musician, but you start here with C and D, E, F, G, A, but then you come back to C, okay? And what it's done is it's laid it out with the colors. In other words, the same colors you'd get on the rainbow would represent the musical notes, except for one thing, and that is that in light we're only seeing one octave, whereas in music we can hear about 5 octaves. The octave below, so if we took that, from this C to this C was visible light, the octave below that would be infrared light, and the octave above that would be ultraviolet light. And again, going out in this spiral of frequencies. So the idea is that there isn't just a tree, there is also an extended tree, that these trees are stacked one on top of the other. And so if you think of it this way, that the Ein Sof, which is the endless idea of the tree, the top sphere of the tree, Kether, separates or encompasses something, and then everything outside of that Kether sphere is Ein Sof, is endless. Well, the next higher tree would start with Kether as its lowest point, its foundation sphere, number 10, and go up from there. And the number 10, this foundation sphere, let me turn off my webcam so I can see this, the Yehod right here on here would actually be the Kether of the next tree. And so they stack on each other. Now, Royland also made this extended tree, basically running them all down the center line in a row. But if you look at that, it's very much like DNA. I mean, except the DNA is also curving, right? Arcing. So in nature, that tree follows that spiral pattern, and it's like a ladder, going up. And so I think that it's very interesting to ponder this sacred spiral of creation. And by the way, this mathematical ratios we're talking about, this is a whirlpool. So when you see water going down the drain and it spirals, it follows this same mathematical pattern. I mean, so this mathematical pattern, these ratios that define music and color and vibration, are found everywhere throughout the universe. The whole universe is basically vibrating, and it all vibrates on patterns that are very much like music and color. And most of it we can't see or experience with our senses, but it's still out there. So the sacred spiral represents the golden ratio, which is this ratio from this line to this line, okay? And the spiral goes, around. And so this box basically is the next smaller box, right? And then this box is the next smaller box, and then this box is the next smaller box. And again, this is called the golden ratio. The golden ratio is found throughout our body. It's found throughout all living things. It is basically many of you have probably seen Leonardo da Vinci's, famous thing that's used in holistic healing with the guy with his arms out. Well, what that's depicting is that the ratios of the body as a whole to the length of the arms and everything is all based on this golden ratio. In other words, it's very vibratory in nature. So if you look at this again from the standpoint of the electromagnetic spectrum, which includes radio and microwaves and infrared and the visible light and then ultraviolet light and then X-rays and gamma rays and who knows what's beyond that. Okay, the wavelength of radio is like the length of a building, right? You understand? It's really, really big. It's like a string that's like the width of a building vibrating up and down, making a wave. And then a microwave is about the width of a human body. So it's basically, it's now a shorter wave. And these waves are getting shorter as they go up in frequency, because the shorter the wave, the more frequent its interval. So when you get into up to infrared and into that, the wavelength is actually about the width of a bee. And then this one shows it's about the width of the eye of a needle or a needle. And this is like a single cell, which would fit like on the point of a needle and be much smaller than that. Is still invisible light. And then the ultraviolet light is vibrating down to where it's the size of molecules, and X-rays up to the size of atoms, and gamma rays to the size of the atomic nucleus, in terms of the size of the wavelength. But again, all through this is this mathematical progression of the length of waves forming basically octaves. So an interesting thing of this is the periodic table of elements is called periodic because it cycles around. And the reason why it gets wider as it goes down, all right, so it starts with just two elements, hydrogen and helium, is because each shell of the atom, I'm going to turn on my cam so you can see this again. Okay, so here's the shell where the electrons is. Each shell can only hold so many electrons before it has to form another shell farther out. So the first shell can only hold 2 electrons. So if there's 1 electron in the first shell, it's hydrogen. If there's 2, it's helium. And then the next shell can hold more, okay, and it goes out. So, but what you get is, as each shell fills up, then you get, these are called the noble gases. These don't interact chemically with anything because they're completely, their electron shells are completely filled up. And so that's sort of like Kether on the Tree of Life. It stands apart. Whereas if you come over here, this is more like foundation at the bottom of the tree, with something that's just moved out of being unstable. And so basically each of these groups in the periodic table of elements has similar chemical properties. And so the periodic table is spiraling outward, getting more and more elements on it as it spirals outward. Does that make sense? The innermost spiral can only hold 2 elements. Then the next one can hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? There's an octave. And then the next one holds 8 again. And then the next one doubles that, or is it to 16? Yeah, 16. And then it goes up from there. All right. And keeps spiraling out and getting bigger. So in fact, I understand the guy who invented it basically saw it on a spiral. So see here, you have these elements, and these different columns of the periodic table of elements are like different frequencies of music or color or whatnot that interact in the dance of life. So each column is like a particular musical note or a particular color and has similar elements. So like going back to here, you have this one I've always thought was really interesting. You have copper, silver, and gold right here. And all of these are very good conductors of electricity. They're all metals that have been used as money. They're perceived as having value. They have some kind of particular energy associated with them. And so each of these columns has its own particular frequencies or energies associated with it. That's what I think is fascinating with it. I still wish I had the paper that somebody wrote me when they put the tree of life, the periodic table on the tree of life for me, and then I lost their email, so I don't have it anymore. And I need to try and go figure out how to reconstruct what they did. So let's talk a little bit about the holographic universe, because in addition to their idea of there being an extended tree that goes on infinitely in both directions, there's always a set of frequencies lower or higher. Then you also have the idea of trees within trees. In other words, each sphere of the tree of life contains a tree within it. And this is a principle that I learned early on in my study of energetics with the four elements. It's also true of yin and yang. And so just turning this off for a second, just to, the slide presentation. So I can just show you on the screen here. Let's stop slide presentation. So if you take yin and yang, the idea of two different things, like up and down, right, left, hot and cold, and so forth, every pair of opposite inner elements, if you break it down, you can find within each side two more pairs. And then inside of those is another pair. In other words, you can keep splitting everything apart into yin and yang. And you can do that so that everything you see is part of a greater whole, part of a greater yin and yang pair, and every yin and yang pair has a smaller yin and yang pair within it. That's what I call nesting and stacking. That's what Carl and I came up with the four elements. And this is very important to understand, because it also explains that elemental models like yin and yang and the four elements and the patterns on the tree of life are all patterns of relationship. They're not patterns of boxes that contain things. They're showing relationships, because the frequencies that make up music are mathematical relationships. They're not, there's an infinite number of little variations of frequencies in between the major colors and the major musical notes. So for example, where you define the base frequency for C defines all of the other notes. But if you shift the base frequency of C, it shifts all the other notes, because they're in relationship to each other. And so that's one of the things that makes these models really interesting, is because they show us relationships. They help us learn to think in how is this related to something else? Where does it fit into the pattern of the whole? Rather than thinking of everything as fragmented like we tend to do in our Western society. And that's one of the reasons why pondering these has been a really interesting thing for me. And one of the things that was that I read in looking into music that I thought was really interesting is every time you sound a musical note, in the overtones of the musical note, which is the other kind of tones that play with it, the entire musical scale sounds within the overtones. So every note has the entire musical scale within it, which is a validation of the idea of this holographic universe. And we see this if you study health, and you look at, like, for example, there's a map of the body on the hand. There's a map of the body on the foot. There's a map of the body on the iris. There's a map of the body on the ear. There's a map of the body on the tongue. In other words, each part has a reflection of the whole within it, right? And therefore, that would also suggest that each of us is part of a greater whole as well. And that's the idea of nesting and stacking, that you can go not only extending the frequencies like this, but you also extend them holographically in that each thing breaks down into another pattern of things and so forth. So this is just interesting. I've shown you the map of the tree on the body that I did, and I'm going to just turn off the webcam again here. And one morning I woke up, and this just came to me as clear as a bell. And what's interesting is this really, I got this before I learned about Rayet iridology and the different types in Rayet, and it fit perfectly. And then I found other validations of this model very clear. I saw that, okay, we have 2 eyes, then we have 1 nose, then we have 2 ears, then we have 1 mouth, and then we have 2 hands, which represents the sense of touch. So we have 3 major senses that we experience in bilaterally, one on each side of the body, and 2 major senses that are central in the center part of the body. And those bilateral senses, okay, so if this is the world of the mind in our body map, and this is the world of the heart, and this is the world of the gut, the world of the physical body, then what this model suggests is that vision is the primary doorway to the mental world, hearing is the primary doorway to the emotional, spiritual world, and touch is the primary doorway to the physical world. And so when I studied Rayet iridology, sure, lo and behold, the analytical thinking type that primarily processes the world through their head learns primarily through their eyes. The more emotional type of the flower who lives more in the world of their heart primarily likes to learn through their ears. And the kinesthetic person who's more grounded in their body likes to learn through the sense of touch. And so it's a big validation of that. And notice how, for example, the mouth here, the mouth connects to the nose, the mouth connects to the ears through the eustachian tube, and the mouth also has a sense of touch. So that point right there is number 7. It's the center of the senses. It's the core of the senses is the mouth, the sense of taste, because it's like when you eat something, you make it part of you. So the sense of tasting something is the sense of actually taking it into you in the fullest sense. And so we hear ourselves chewing the food, we smell the food as we're chewing it, and we have a sensation of the mouth feel of a food, all of which is tied in together in that. So this also would suggest that the nose connects very strongly up into the brain, which we know it does because aromatherapy, it has a huge influence on that. But this model, it also suggests the nose connects very clearly with our sense of both hearing and seeing, alerting or basically turning on those senses to make us alert to things. Now, when I saw this, I was left with, okay, there's a sphere at the top and a sphere at the bottom, and I realized the topmost sphere was intuition, which is a spiritual pure knowledge that we get kind of when we get an idea or some kind of inspiration, and instinct, as in gut instinct, the pre-programmed knowing that we have within ourselves. And so there you have a holographic thing. You have the body as a whole, the world of the head, the world of the heart, and the world of the body, and you have that, again, portrayed within the senses. And Royland did a tree of the brain. And so, for example, you have 3 main divisions in the brain. You have the higher cerebellum, the brain where we have our reason and everything. You have the middle brain, which is the emotional brain. And you have the lower brain, which is the reptilian brain, which governs the physical thing. So in the structure of our brain, this same pattern can be observed. And he basically laid out all of the different structures in the brain on the Tree of Life. And he said one of the reasons why learning the Tree of Life was so valuable is because it's like learning the structure of your own mind. You're seeing the very structure that's within you. So Royland also has, because you can put a tree inside of each tree. When I met him, he was doing this crazy project. He was doing second and third generation trees and basically mapping language on them, mapping concepts in language on the Tree of Life. It's quite an amazing individual. And I, based on a couple of things he said, sat down and tried to do this myself with the judgment sphere, which is the thymus energy center, and the heart sphere, which is the mercy energy center, number 5 and number 6, and break them down into another tree. And so I kind of was just playing with some of this. So the first number, 6, represents the sphere on the tree this is, and the second number represents the tree within the tree. So in other words, 6.0 is the Ian Sofer endless of judgment. 6.1 is the Kether of judgment, and so forth. So as I was doing this, I said, okay, so Kether is basically the sphere that excludes everything. So what would be the Kether of judgment? What is excluded from judgment? And I thought, well, those who are blameless, those who are innocent, are excluded from judgment. There's nothing, they're pure. There's nothing to judge them. So what separates that tree of judgment, everything within the tree of judgment has to be there because you have a lack of innocence. There has been some kind of trespass or crime or sin that makes someone not pure, not blameless, or not innocent. And so you can see how I kind of worked with that. And I did the same thing over here with the mercy tree. So what is excluded from the tree of mercy? What is excluded from the need for mercy? Well, that which is strong and powerful and whole and doesn't need any help is outside of the bounds of the concept of mercy. But that which is, suffered and had a deprivation or a loss or whatever would be encompassed within the mercy tree. And then I did the same thing with the bottom, who is, since the bottom sphere surrounds in other words, 10, this one surrounds everything here. Then I thought, well, what is that? So I did, well, the tree of judgment surrounds basically the guilty, surrounds those who are sinful and guilty. And it is their guilt and shame that sets the boundary of that tree. And over here on the other side, I did the same thing. Everything that's helpless or weak or whatever is surrounded by the potential of mercy or redemption. And another one that I did, and this was not just original with me, but it was what Royland said, there is a mercy within judgment. In other words, so here's judgment. This is 6.6 would be pure judgment. It would be judgment within judgment. But 6.5 would be mercy within judgment. Well, is there mercy in judgment? And the answer is yes. I can be lenient. I can be sparing. I can not met out the full penalty of the law. I can be lax. Whereas, is there judgment in mercy? In other words, this sphere over here would be 5.5, which is pure mercy, just unbounded mercy, unbounded grace, unbounded salvation. But is there something restrains that? And I thought, well, what restrains unbounded mercy is that you have to be contrite. You, or even maybe more accurately, you have to be merciful. If you're not merciful, then the judgment in mercy is that mercy is only available to those who are merciful, who are penitent and merciful. And so you can see that I kind of played with this tree and this idea of sub-meanings within the tree. Now, another fascinating thing in the tree is numerology. And I find this is very interesting, especially for any of you who are into studying the Bible, because the Bible uses number symbolism a lot. And So this system of numerology found in the Tree of Life is the most amazing, symmetrical, balanced, logical system of numbers and sequence of numbers and everything that I've ever seen anywhere. And so the sphere, Ian Soph, is nothing, numberless. And what Royland says is because there's a whole tree in there, there's a range of concepts that go from one end to the other end. So what these things in here are basically the whole range of the meanings within that sphere. So Ian Soph goes from nothing or having no number to being innumerable or infinite. Understand? So from having nothing to being infinite. Whereas one, on the one end, is singular, on the other hand is unified, comprehensive, covering everything. Dual is, two is duality, or the image, like a mirror image of something, or a negative, but it also has the idea of being paired, of being, being the companions being united. Three has the idea of separation. Binah means, which is the name of that sphere, is the space between two things, is what divides things, what makes them different. And yet you also have in number three the concept of the Trinity, the three in one, the three that appear separate but are actually one, which is a very interesting concept, and so on, so forth through the different numbers. And it's an unfolding sequence of numbers in creation. And again, from a biblical idea, if we're talking about nested trees, okay, the number 666 would be judgment within judgment within judgment. It would be pure, rigid structure and order, total control, total judgment, total structure, no mercy, no leniency, no, you follow that? Which is very interesting. And the whole idea of number 7, the seventh day, which is the heart of the tree. The seventh day is the day of rest, but the heart of the tree is the point where everything comes together, where the three become the one, where you have the body, mind, and spirit all joined together. It's the solar plexus where you feel centered, okay, and you come into self-harmony. And then, of course, 8 is beginning again, which is basically the octave, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Ti would be the 7th number, do, back to do again, beginning again. The 8th number begins again. So there's a whole fascinating numerology on this thing that makes a lot of sense. The thing that's the most fascinating to me, and the thing that I would love to play with the most, is that Royland did something that I'm not aware that anybody has ever done before. Well, partly because his tree is so different than the tree that's out there that the sphere number 4 is missing. There are 22 pathways on the Tree of Life, and they correspond to 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but they also correspond to the 22 letters of the Aramaic alphabet. And Royland actually decoded the Phoenician alphabet on this, and he also decoded the oldest known alphabet. That nobody knows how to read it. He actually decoded where those symbols would go on the Tree of Life, and that the drawing of the symbols represented the path of creation coming down the tree, which was really fascinating. Very deep stuff, but these are the Hebrew letters of the alphabet, and this is a very fascinating aspect of the tree, because Royland took the entire Hebrew language. He was majoring in Hebrew in college. He took the entire Hebrew language, and he took and mapped out the words on the Tree of Life. In the Hebrew language, all of these letters are consonants. The vowels weren't written. Their corresponding English letters are there, but we have vowels, and not all of their letters. All of their letters were consonants. But anyway, he mapped this out and found that well over 90% of all of the words in Hebrew formed patterns on the tree of life. Literally formed recognizable patterns that made sense within the tree, which is just literally mind-bogglingly amazing. And I'm going to share just a few ideas about this with you. I may come back to this in a second. But these pathways are a whole nother part of the tree that I've never explored how they fit in emotional healing. They all have a direction and a flow. So what you have here, there's an arrow missing across the middle. If you follow the lightning what's called the lightning path of lightning flash of creation, and I've got two arrows reversed here, I see, when I put this together, because lightning flash of creation is the unfolding of creation that goes 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. Oops, I messed that one up. 7, 8 to 9, 9 to 10. That's how things flow down the tree in this spiraling manner. And then there's a flow back up the tree that goes from 10 to 9, 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 to, no, 6. Sorry. The upward flow of the tree goes 10 to 8 to 9. And then, but it goes the opposite direction. I did put, I need to go back and share the file. I shared it before. And then we had to restart the thing because of the sound problem. So apologize for that. So what's interesting is and this is, again, the number stuff on this just blows my mind. There are 3 horizontal pathways, 7 vertical pathways, and 12 diagonal pathways, 3, 7, and 12, adding up to 22. That's just really fascinating to me. And of course, the horizontal pathways are found in the worlds, and they're what connect the opposing forces within those worlds. So, like down here, the liver and pancreatic center. And when I talk about the conflict, there's a conflict in our physical nature between wanting to avoid pain and wanting to experience pleasure, and wanting to push away and wanting to draw in. And that pathway represents the pathway that unifies those two opposing forces. Same thing moving up the pathway, the spheres of mercy and judgment, the ego center, which is the center of judgment, and the mercy center, which is the center of kindness and compassion and friendship. Those two are conflicting ideas, but there's a pathway that connects them, that pulls them together, that keeps them balanced and integrated. And the same thing between the right and left hemispheres of the brain, the two sides of the mind. There's a pathway that connects those. And then there's the pathway that goes down through the center, and the pathway that goes on the right side, and the pathway that goes on the left side. And I talked about the energy centers, the right side being the part that pushes away. It's the masculine side, the left side being the feminine side that draws in, the central pillar being the pillar of balance. And then, of course, there's all the 12 diagonal pathways that connect this. Now look at this. This is just an example of what I'm talking about. These 3 letters in Hebrew form words that mean to lay upon or be heavy. So this is judgment in relationship and communication. So this is a thing that's pointing towards judgment, which is definitely conveys that idea of being heavy or to lay a burden on someone. But if you go and look at the opposite letters on the opposite side, this forms Hebrew words that mean to forgive or to pardon. That's fascinating. And down here in the physical world, this means to lay hold of or wield or to take up. And this means to let go of or cut off or let fall. And it goes on and on like that throughout this entire tree. It's literally just mind-bogglingly amazing. And this is one of the ones that Royland shared with me, which I thought was very, very interesting. And it has to do with the idea of Jacob's ladder. Now, I didn't have a current tree where I have this turned so that you can see that there's a backside, but the backside has these three horizontal pathways. And of course, if you put that on an extended tree, you'd have a ladder of horizontal pathways. Would be like a ladder, like the idea of Jacob's ladder, going up and down, up and down from the heaven to the earth, from the higher vibration to the lower vibration. But when Ezekiel he comes to a river in Babylon called the Kebar River, and this is the sound b, this is the sound k, this is the sound r. So this is the river r b k. Okay, I mean sorry, k b r. So the energy starts here and goes up and comes back down again. Okay, and this river is symbolizing the river that is a barrier or obstacle, perhaps even the whole idea of the mythical river Styx that separates this world from the next, that you cross over when you die. But it's a barrier. It's a barrier or an obstacle. And there he meets the K-R beam. K-R-B. So K-R-B. Now that's the opposite energy of the K-B-R, which is starting at the middle, going up and going down. This is starting at the middle, going down and coming back up. And that word in English is translated cherubim. So if you remember the story in Genesis with Adam and Eve, where they're cast out of the Garden of Eden, and God puts cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way or the path of the tree of life. So the cherubim are the guardians of the way. All right. And they have brought to Ezekiel the Merkabah, okay, which has these letters, Ra. It's also pronounced the Rakabah or Kb, which is the chariot that mounts up, that rises, goes up. And that just lays this whole interesting meaning when you see that there's these pictures in the Hebrew words that fit on this tree. It's just very, very fascinating to me, these pathways. And especially, let me tell you some practical application I've made of these things. Okay, so the r sound in Hebrew means to accelerate, to speed up, it's a vitalizing sound. So if you go, when you go grrr, okay, the r sound, if you just say it, you'll find that you feel it vibrating in your belly. The r sound, like grrr, like the tiger. It has this very gut level sound. And that's why I started using the grrr to help people get in touch with their guts, is because I found when they made that sound, it pulled them into their guts. When they lacked that fortitude, that courage, that practicing the r sound was healing to them. Now the k means the hand in cupping shape, and it refers to the idea of striking two stones together to polish them, to make them smooth. In other words, it conveys the idea of being a mirror or a polished, smooth surface. It's also associated with the idea of being a veil. Okay, like the veil that, again, separates us from God, the veil in our minds or the veil in our perception that prevents us from seeing the divine. But what's interesting is it's not a veil as we think of as like a curtain. It's a veil that's a mirror. And so I realized that when we're stuck in the lower world, in the physical world, and we're stuck in our own ego, then this pathway, which prevents us from accessing the higher energies, the more spiritual energies, is a mirror. And that what we see is we see ourselves in everything. Everything that we see and judge and out there is really we're seeing it based on what's inside of us. We're seeing it as a reflection of us. It's reflecting back to us who we are. Until we are able to reconcile this and go through the looking glass, through that magical corridor, and come to know true love and true mercy, and then that gives us access into the higher realm. This is the dividing place between the upper and lower tree. Everything on the upper tree is mirrored in the lower tree from this point on, and they add up to 11. So this one is 6, that one's 5, this one's 4, that one's 7. So these two are opposites, these two are opposites, and the opposites go up and down the tree. Buh. Now, if you go, it vibrates in your chest. And I realize when someone's going coughing, they often are trying to get something off their chest. And often that something off their chest is they're trying to reconcile this desire for self-preservation, this desire for my own ego, for my own interests and the interests of other people. And how do I resolve that? How do I protect myself and yet be loving? How do I speak my truth and be integrous and yet at the same time be kind? That is the polishing aspect of that pathway. As we learn to have firmness within ourselves and compassion for other people, we become polished or smooth. And then the buh sound, buh, 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 you just go buh, 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 buh. You'll feel it vibrating up in your head. It literally vibrates up in your head. And it means to house or contain. So when we're able to use both our right brain, our creative brain, and our logical brain together, we are able to house or contain information. We truly are able to understand things. We're able to grasp real knowledge, which is another interesting aspect of the tree. And I want to show you, before I go to this parting thoughts thing, I want to come back here and I want to show you another interesting thing that I had with sounds in the tree. This pathway right here is the physical pillar of the tree. This represents the physical attributes. It's also the masculine, what I call the masculine or yang side of the tree. And the numbers are 3, 6, and 9 going down. Very orderly. 3, 6, 9. A very orderly progression. And very stable. 3 makes a stool, very stable. 6 makes a honeycomb, very stable. 9 makes a tic-tac-toe grid, very stable. All very stable, all very separate, all very distinct, all very physical, because the physical world, the physical pillar, is the pillar of separation that divides, separates, clarifies, makes things clear. But it's also a descending pathway. In other words, it is a pathway that goes down. And so the two sounds here are duh and Now look at the words and feel. I want you to feel the energy of this and feel the downward flow of this. Damn, dumb, dumb, dim, doom. You feel it? Doom, damn, dumb, dim. Dum da dum 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 da dum dum dum. And then if you add the T sound, damn it, damn it. There's what I'm trying to explain is there is power in the sounds of words. The poet, in using the concept of alliteration, is taking the sounds of the words and adding to the meaning of the words and making the sounds of the words convey meaning. And so that's a very interesting thing in language. Now, the this one, P is P sound is to penetrate, okay, overwhelm. And so you think of P, it's very explosive, you see. An interesting one is this is actually the H sound in English. It's to breathe, okay? It's like the breath of life. Ha, hey. And, if you go like the aloha, the ha sound, ah, this is actually not the A sound, but if you add the A as a vowel, ah, ha. It's like an opening. But this one is interesting because this actually is soundless. This is actually a break in the flow of speech, like the word da-ot. In between the da and the ot is a pause. Tef eret. That little break is that letter in Hebrew. So it's a consonant that has no sound. And this is the pathway from duality to oneness, which is silence, the path of silence, silencing the inner self to get back to oneness. Pondering this stuff as I've gotten all these kinds of very, very wild insights into things. So I'm not suggesting that you have to, totally understand the tree of life to do emotional healing work. But what I'm am trying to say is that the model that I built this on is really rich in meaning. And as you work with people, see, when I first did this, I only had a vague idea of what the tree of life meant. I had no idea how it applied to human psyche and emotion. But as I applied it, I got a better understanding of the meaning of the spheres and the way the tree of life works, because I would see patterns in people. I would test their energy centers. I would see where they were blocked, and then as we delved into what was going on in them, I would see how that fit the patterns on the tree just amazingly well. And I also have hypothesized that we could create a range, a whole tree of life in each one of the energy centers, which would be the whole range of emotions that would show up in that center. But this is all projects that just basically I've never had the time to do. Been busy, whatever. And so part of the reason why I teach this is because I'm hoping someday that there might be some people who actually get involved in this and do this enough that we might actually be able to brainstorm and collaborate a little bit and actually find more applications, especially, for example, using sounds. If we could really understand the sounds, the is the gut sound. Okay, I think it would help us a lot, because we could also use sounds to help activate certain pathways and energy spheres in people. I've toyed with it a little bit, but I haven't done enough to actually, teach it all across the entire board. I did mention that I made some errors when I was putting the direction of flow of the pathways on that chart, and so I need to go back and fix it and redo it and then re-upload the handouts. What I'm going to do next time is I'm going to show you some applications of all of this to some things I've learned. I'm going to actually show you the 10 Commandments on the Tree of Life, which is one of the things that Royland showed me, and talk about the 10 Commandments from the Path of Tree of Life. And I'm going to show you a couple other models and then kind of wrap this up. But I just want you to understand that this is a very, very powerful thing that goes way beyond emotional healing. And emotional healing is just the most practical application I've been able to make of it. But nonetheless, it's really opened up my brain and my understanding of life, the universe, and everything to go from Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy. He has a book called Life, the Universe, and Everything. Um, and I believe, this is what I believe. I believe that we are deceived in this world because people have light and knowledge that they are able to abuse and twist and confuse us and so forth. But as I've learned these things, I have found that it has given me a real penetrating ability to see patterns in things and patterns of truth in things and cut through a lot of BS because it's really helped my brain to be more clear. Because to me, everything that is true is simple, logical, organized, integrates with everything else that's true. And so it's really a holistic pattern of truth. And it's just been a fascinating journey for me, and I'm glad I had a chance to share a little bit with you. Now, if there's anybody who has any questions, I have a few minutes to entertain some questions before I go. I also want to mention that this series is ending, but this week, and it will be on Wednesday mornings during the day. So I don't have, I'm trying to avoid scheduling so many webinars in the evening so I get home to my family a little sooner. But I am going to start my Seeking Light and Truth show, which is going to be the next stage because it's not going to be about emotional healing. It's going to be about healing the it's going to be about healing everything. I'm going to start with the educational system. I'm going to start with the educational system, and I'm going to relate to this to some of these concepts of energetics, because when I learned the Walter Gong model, and then I learned the 4-element model and the 3-element model, everything fit, energetically fit. And then I started learning other things that energetically fit, and they fit, and they fit, and they fit, and they fit. And so basically I started creating all these patterns. And many of them I've never shared. And so I'm going to start sharing them. I'm going to start talking about them. And I'm going to start with learning. I'm going to start with what's wrong with our educational system, and how do we really learn, and how do we expand our minds to really understand things. And so that's what's going to happen in the new series. If you haven't signed up for it, I'll try to send out an email to everybody again to get started with it. It will begin this Wednesday, and it will also be posted to YouTube as well as to my Vimeo channel, because I've noticed that YouTube's been, not with me, but with other people, has been practicing some censorship. And so I want to make sure that I have everything backed up on a different place that's controversial in case they decide to take some of these videos down. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to get back on. I'm sorry for the difficulty getting this thing started, but the recording will be up, so I hope you all are able to enjoy it. And I guess that's everything. There weren't any other questions. Like I said, I know this is really deep stuff. I had to ponder it for quite a while before I started to grasp it, and I still don't grasp it. But it does amaze me to think that there is this kind of pattern and structure in the universe, because what it does is it convinces me that the universe is a very orderly place and has a very, very and has a creator who knows exactly what he's doing, and to blend all of these different things together in a beautiful, harmonious way. So again, thanks everybody for being part of this, and I'll look forward to finishing up with our last session next week.